I'll follow Tony's lead. Brandon couldn't be here today. He's here with us in spirit. If you see anything bad in the paper, let's blame him. Okay? So this is me, this is him, and where are the arrows? Oh, there they are. Okay. This paper is dealing with constituent approval and congressional support for the president. It's a very, very old question in political science, in presidency studies, but and if you read the literature, it's just all over the map in terms of findings. I mean, there's even negative results in this. And there's two reasons for this. One is empirical. The underlying theory that links approval to members' voting behavior is member responsiveness to their constituents. We do not have constituent level data. We usually have national level data, which often require people to create summary measures of voting behavior for Congress on an aggregate annual basis, but that tells us nothing about how the individual members behave, and that's one of the things that we would like to know, because it's different when you may have an aggregate relationship versus having an individual one. So one of the things that we try to do in this paper, and I want to thank Chris Warshaw for helping us, and for Brandon, who I think has about as much hair as I do now for trying to figure out how to do this MRP stuff. And we used the cooperative congressional election studies over a 7-year period. They're very, very large N studies, and they identify the congressional districts that people live in, so we can get House measures as well as Senate measures over an extended period of time. 2006 through 2012, which is 7 years of data, but it's during the period of high polarization. So our baseline expectation is maybe we're not going to find anything substantial in here. There's a second issue with the literature, and it's theory. And the way that the theory is stated is that members will respond to approval of the president because of electoral motivations, but that does not lead to a testable hypothesis. And what we try to develop is an idea that members vary in how electorally vulnerable they're going to be. And using that marginality kind of literature, members that are more vulnerable should be more sensitive to opinion in the district. So that gives us actually a hypothesis that allows us to discriminate across members, which is the only reason to go do something like this. You need a hypothesis that tells you something about the individual members and how they differ. So we hope that that's a bit of a contribution. Not sure about that. I just want to get into the data now. The theory and all this is just so intuitive that we don't have to spend a whole lot of time on it. But we've all seen the graphs of voting in Congress for the president by party, and it's just completely polarized. There's like gaps in the middle. That is not the way it looks when you do this for presidential approval. I don't know if you can see this very well, but here we divided members up into members of the president's party, members of the opposition party, and then we just overlaid distributions of support for the president within the constituencies. And for all of the years, this is for the House, there's a tremendous amount of overlap, which means that a member of the president's party may have constituents who like the president a lot. Other members of the same party may have constituents who dislike the president, and the reverse for the opposition party, which means that there's different kinds of signals coming out of the constituencies that are going to members of both parties. So we're not finding a polarization result. We see the same thing in the Senate, where there's tremendous amounts of overlap that you just wouldn't expect from the polarization literature. We have, I just want to get into the results now. The models are actually relatively simple. We control for, let me actually put this up. I hate to put these kind of things up, but unlike Tony, I can't do the little graphs and stuff like that. I'm who's it? Tom approves the actor, I got to see the numbers, which is as close as I get to the money. So we have a control variable for whether a member is a party of the president or not, a control for whether the president is of the majority party or not, because this gives him agenda control, which may be favorable voting rules and things like that that will give the president an advantage, kind of a la Matt Beckman sort of ideas. We have an ideological distance measure. In the paper, we use the Bonica scores. Charisse told me, why don't you use the DW nominate scores? We did that. It comes out the same way. It doesn't really matter. And then this is the estimate for presidential approval within the district. And for both the House and the Senate, we get really sizable coefficients, 0.37 for the House, 0.61 for the Senate. Those are massively big. I'm going to come back to this in a second because it's not making the right kind of comparison. We do the same here. This is the House and the Senate. Let me just talk about this for 1 second. There's a whole lot of cross-sectional variation in this. So basically the coefficient, most of the coefficient is telling you how Democrats and Republicans differ. So if you do your simulation, for like the standard deviation pattern in the approval, you're basically taking a Democratic district and turning it into a Republican district, and that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. When we redo the simulations by looking at within district change in presidential approval, you get at most about 5% change as opposed to maybe 100% change in here. When you do that and run the simulation, you get about a 2% average difference for both houses. And this comes back to the old Bond and Fleischer idea that approval is statistically significant but a marginal influence. But at least we have some empirical footing now at the individual level that says the same thing, and that's kind of nice. But more of the punch to this is to get into member vulnerability, because this is the important theoretical linkage that goes on here. And for the House, we use several different measures of whether a member is vulnerable. The previous election percent, and Georgia Cornell's measure of how strong the political party is at the mass level within the district. And we get nice interaction effects. See, I can actually make a picture here. The steepest line is for the members who are the most vulnerable. It doesn't look so great here, but there is a spread, and that spread is statistically significant. This is just using the past election results. But remember, past election results are actually really very constrained in the amount of the vote that members get. Almost everything is within a 40-60% range. Georgia's data, which basically just categorizes districts from being highly competitive to highly safe, shows a much, much larger difference here. They both point in the same direction and do show that for the House, representatives are sensitive to constituency opinion conditioned by their level of electoral vulnerability, the way we would expect. We do the same thing for the Senate. Election performance is not a good idea for measuring the vulnerability of senators because that was 6 years ago, and 6 years ago is several different lives of dogs. A new president comes along, people are kind of myopic in their public opinion, so some of the literature on marginality for senators really suggests that you want to look at the electoral cycle, and that as members are coming up for re-election, that's when they're going to be more sensitive, and you can condition that with how strong or weak they may be in the district, how strong or weak their party is. And just as one model here, we just added a dummy variable for the 5th and 6th year of the member term. And then we interacted that with approval, and we get a nice solid coefficient there. Senators coming up for re-election are much more sensitive to presidential approval in the district. And that's sort of the empirics for the paper. What do we contribute? Well, we actually show that the basic idea that members are responsive to their constituents in supporting the president holds. The effect is moderated by the electoral vulnerability. That the effect substantively is not huge, but it's measurable, is consistent with previous literature, but we're giving a real empirical foundation to it. But it also suggests that we need to be thinking about how presidents may be targeting districts and members as they try to build coalitions in Congress, which open, and there's a whole other literature on that, but it's not really connected very much to this. Other contributions, David will do a better job when he does his paper. There's a measurement strategy, for trying to understand subunits in the United States, like approval. We've tried to elaborate or begin to build a real theory. I shouldn't say that. That connects all these different elements of vulnerability, constituent opinion, support for the president. And let's see, directions to go in the future. And I know that like Jeff Laxon has been trying to work on this, and his friends, of trying to disaggregate local opinion by partisanship, and ask the question, which people in the constituency are members of Congress responding to? Is it people who vote for them in the primaries? Is it people who are in their political party? Is it ideological compatriots and things like that? That's possible to do with these techniques, but it's beyond me. I don't have enough hair to pull out, so I'm going to wait for somebody who can figure out how to do that. And just as speculation, and I've been rethinking this, that this is done during a period of high polarization between the parties when we would not expect to get very big results, but we get some results. It would be great to be able to do this in an early period of time when things are not so polarized, but you can't do it because people did not collect the data. Gallup does not have data for what congressional district people are in, or if they have it, they purged it from the old files, so you can't go back. But after reading Gary Jacobson's paper in JOP, which says that the incumbency advantage may have been weakening the last decade or so, maybe we don't need to, we're kind of seeing the maximum that you can get out of this. And did I do okay?
Oh, yeah, everybody put over.
Oh, I
Somebody interrupt you guys.
Okay.
So you're not going to know.
Okay, so somebody can figure out how to get out of my paper.